So we're part 2 of a series called How to Be Rich. And if you are here for your first time or weren't here last week and you're starting to think, did I come to the wrong church? Like, is this a prosperity gospel church? I don't want to be part of a prosperity gospel church. We have to understand the title here is How to Be Rich, not How to Get Rich. And I'll probably say that every week because I want to be clear about that, okay? This is not about how to get rich. It's how to be rich. And again, I'll also say this is based on a book by Andy Stanley. Based heavily, it take a lot from him. He also has a sermon series on Right Now Media, so you can watch that and sort of follow along. You'll hear a lot of the same kind of stuff because I'm basing my stuff on what he said. And I said last week, I'll say it again probably next week. One of the reasons I do that is because when I come to a topic that I think is really important, like personal finance, but I don't feel really confident in because I just don't feel like I do it very well. I like to lean on somebody else and sort of say, what's somebody who's smarter than me, what do they say about this, and then how can I communicate that best to our congregation here? And so I do believe finances are really important. It's one of the reasons I think that is because Jesus thought that. He talked more about finances in the Bible than he did about heaven and hell combined. And we feel like that's pretty important stuff. So probably how you handle your money is just as important. One of the reasons is because we finished off with it last week. Where your heart is, where your treasure is, there your heart is also. And so Jesus knew that our hearts are going to be drawn towards our wallets. And so he talked a lot about it. Last week we discovered that you are probably rich, but you've never learned how to be rich, so you probably aren't very good at it. Chances are you haven't learned because you don't think you're rich. If you make $48,000 a year, you are rich. You are in the top 1% of the world. Do you remember a few years ago when we had all those protests, Protest Wall Street and stuff like that, and they were like down with the 1%? Chances are most of the people who were protesting were part of the 1%. They just didn't realize it. And I can tell you that you are rich, most likely. I don't know your personal finances, but compared to the rest of the world, you are rich. But you don't get excited about that because you don't feel rich. I mean, the fact that I'm telling you that doesn't change anything in your life, right? Like, you still know how much is in your bank account, more or less. You still know that there's times when you go to the store and you have to ask yourself, can I really afford to buy what I'm about to buy? You don't feel rich. And the reason you don't feel rich, the key word for feeling rich is margin. This is a bit of a recap from last week for those who were here. The key word is margin. It's the space between what your limit is and what you are currently at. And some people have that limit, or some people are right at their limit. Some people are beyond their limit, to be honest. You are spending more than you actually have. You're living on credit. Some people, very rarely, are way down below that, and they've got all this space between, and that's the margin. Those are the people who say, if I want something, I'm just going to buy it because I know I've got the money for it. I talked last week about how I felt that way when I was a teenager. I didn't have any bills, I didn't have a mortgage, but I had some money saved up because I had a job, and if I wanted something, I just went out and bought it. I didn't have to worry about a budget or finances or anything like that. At least I didn't think I did. So the key word here is margin. If you have that space, then you'll feel rich. And so obviously the right thing to do would be to spend less, right? To sort of say, I'm going to pare back everything so that I have all this margin. But we actually do the opposite. We don't like doing that. We're plagued by discontentment, rich people are, and we have these appetites. And the appetites are never fully satisfied. You will never be able to satisfy your appetite. And what Andy taught us last week is that actually when you feed an appetite, it grows. The more and more you feed an appetite, the bigger your appetite gets. The only way to get rid of your appetite is to starve it, and then it shrinks. But rich people don't like doing that. And since we do usually have a little bit of margin, we like to sort of spend more and more. We get more stuff, and our appetite grows. And the more you have, the more you want. And so we do this thing that I talked about last week. We upgrade. You take a perfectly good cell phone. It's not quite as good as it used to be, but it still works. And you take it to the store, and you trade it in, or you don't even trade it in, you do it with the car, but you take your cell phone, you say, I'm going to take this, give it to my kids, I'm going to get the newest model, I'm going to get a better one. A car is a good example. You drive a car that works up to a lot, you give them money, and then you drive away in a car. And don't get me wrong, sometimes that makes sense, but that's what you do when you're rich, right? A poor person doesn't drive up to, doesn't drive a working car up to a lot, give the person more money, and then drive away in a car. You wouldn't do that if you're poor. So rich people get more stuff. Their appetite grows. The more they have, the more they want. They upgrade. They get something newer. They get something nicer. They get more of the same. Kitchen renovation. We did that. We had a kitchen. It had cupboards. We tore them all out and we put up cupboards. And they were nice. I mean, our kitchen looks way better than it did before. We bought our house and there was peel and stick tile floor throughout the entire upstairs. And we took all that out and we put hardwood in there. And we put carpet in the bedrooms, and it looks a lot nicer. But we probably could have lived with tile floor, peel and stick tile. We upgraded because we're rich. I'm not trying to brag, I'm just trying to give you an example of ways that, let me tell you, I don't feel rich, but when I think about it, I know that I am. The problem is upgrades affect your margin. So this thing that makes you feel rich, the more and more you get upgrades, the smaller and smaller your margin gets. And so even though you are rich, you don't feel rich. Truth is, rich people live in denial. Rich people live in denial, which is strange because this doesn't happen in a whole lot of other areas. Tall people know that they're tall. Short people, if they're willing to admit it, they know that they're short. Introverts, they admit that they're introverts. Extroverts can't wait to tell you that they're extroverts. The problem is the question, what is rich? Now, the average American, and I'm sure Canadians are pretty similar, think that if you have $150,000, you're rich. If you earn that much a year, you're rich. Can anyone get on board with that? Yeah, no one wants to raise their hand during this series, I've noticed. Everyone kind of holds their finances close to the vest. Problem is, if you make $150,000, you don't think you're rich. I talked a bit about this last week too. If you make $35,000, you would think somebody who makes $70,000 is rich. But the person who makes $70,000, they look up to the person who makes $150,000. It's like this moving target that you can never actually get. And as you increase your income, your idea of what it means to be rich goes up and up and up. There's a magazine apparently called Money Magazine. A few years ago, they took a poll of their readers. How much money would you need to feel rich? Any guess on how much they said? More. Yeah. $1 million. Anyone else? $5 million. That's how much they would need to feel rich, which tells you a little something about their readership. And maybe we should all start reading Money Magazine. Understand, that means that readers of Money Magazine who have an income of $1 million, or $2 million, or $4 million do not feel rich. $4.5 million, I'm not rich. If I could just get that last little bit, then I'd be rich. And I don't know for sure, but I'd be willing to bet if you ask somebody who made $5 million a year, they would say, probably 7.5. That's when I would really feel rich. It's a moving target, and you will never feel rich unless you have the margin. The problem is, we like upgrades and we shrink that margin. Rich people live in denial. Nobody is rich, but everybody knows someone who is. Again, most of us are rich. We don't know we're rich, so we don't know how to act. They don't know how to be rich, even though we are. We don't know how to be rich. And if you and I don't feel rich, you and I don't think we need to become intentional about being rich, and so we don't learn how. So, it is vital that we learn how to be rich, because being rich comes with side effects. Being rich comes with side effects. Have you ever seen those medication commercials where, this is the thing that will solve your problem, and then they list all the side effects that come with it, and usually to me the side effects sound worse than the actual problem. Sometimes this is true with being rich. The Apostle Paul wrote a couple letters to a man named Timothy, who he was sort of raising up to be his protege. And he talks about the side effects of being rich in 1 Timothy chapter 6, starting in verse 17. He says, "Teach those who are rich in this world not to be proud and not to trust their money, which is so unreliable. Their trust should be in God, who richly gives us all we need for our enjoyment." So what are the side effects here? Teach those who are rich in this world not to be proud and not to trust in their money. First one is pride. First side effect is pride. It makes us arrogant. Second one is it becomes our primary source of hope. So let's talk about arrogance for a little bit. Arrogance is having an inflated sense of self-worth. That's kind of like the textbook definition. And it's easy to understand how this happens to rich people. Easy to understand why rich people would lean in this direction. If your net worth is inflated, there's a good chance that your self-worth will be inflated as well. It's a natural thing. You don't mean for it to happen, you don't plan for it to happen, but the more your net worth is inflated, your self-worth gets inflated as well. You start to think higher of yourself maybe than you should. When you're rich, you have a tendency to inflate every area of your life. You see yourself as smarter, better looking, more competent. You don't mean to. It just sort of happens. Like, you'll be driving down the road and you'll see somebody who's really not well off on the side of the road, and you look at them, and you might start to make judgments about them. Well, maybe if they just did this, maybe they just did that. Maybe you're not a smoker and they are, and you see them smoking, you think, you know what? I bet you they spend a lot of money on cigarettes. If they just took that money and invested it, whatever. If you see the way they're dressed, you say, if they just dressed a little better, they might be able to get a better job, they might be able to have a little more. You start to look down on other people. You don't mean to, but it happens. And what's worse is that other people follow along. When rich people have ideas, people are inclined to think that they're good ideas. You might be in a board meeting and the rich person says something, and you look at them and think, well, they seem to know what they're talking about. They've got their life all together, so maybe what they're saying is making a lot of sense here. Maybe there's some wisdom in what they're saying. They may not have any clue what they're talking about, but they seem like they do because they've got this other area of their life figured out. I don't know about you. I've noticed that wealth alters someone's appearance as well. Sometimes I've noticed that rich people tend to find dates that are surprisingly attractive, comparatively speaking. You might see an older gentleman with a beautiful woman on his arm. I'm not saying anything about their relationship. I'm not making assumptions. It just seems unusual. Same thing's true with their opinions. They're typically more respected when the person is giving them. When the person that is giving the opinion is rich. Sort of the same idea I was talking about before. Just if someone says something, you look at them and they're a rich person, you're probably going to give it a little more credence. So it's not surprising that the net result of wealth, or one of the side effects, is arrogance. The rich person in the circle seems like they know more because they're rich. They think it, and we think it. And so what happens is they start to think that they're smarter than everyone else. They're not necessarily, they're just more wealthy. But they start to think they're smarter. And eventually, they don't mean to, but they start to think that they're better than everyone else. Have you ever heard someone talk about somebody who's rich and say, you know what, they're worth a ton of money, but you would never know it? The reason that they make a statement like that is because most of the time, you know it. Most of the time when someone is rich, you know they're rich because they act like they're rich, because they have this type of arrogance that comes along with it. And so Paul is writing to Timothy, and he's saying, tell them not to do that. Tell the rich people in this world not to be proud. Don't be arrogant. And then the second side effect, I talked a little bit about this last week, the migration of hope. 1 Timothy 6:17 again. Teach those who are rich in this world not to be proud and not to trust in their money, which is so unreliable. This one's actually worse than the first. As bad as arrogance is, as much as we don't want to be somebody who's arrogant, the migration of hope is actually worse. See, when you're rich, there's a tendency for your hope to migrate towards your money. The wealthier you get, the more your hope migrates towards your bank account, towards your wallet. The more your hope will be in your money. If you have a little, you start to lean that way a little. If you have a lot, you lean that way a lot. See, it's one thing to have hope and riches, but this is talking about having hope in riches. I think most of us would like to have hope and riches, but the tendency is that you put your hope in your riches. And again, the temptation is to think that this doesn't apply to you, right? Because I'm not rich. I don't have $5 million. I'm not that guy. I don't need to really be intentional about it yet. But if you even have a basic savings account, if you just have a little bit of money, and maybe you're a teenager and you're putting a little bit away, if you even just do that much, you are standing in a river with the current pulling you towards self-sufficiency. It's like this, as soon as you start saving money, there's a temptation that starts pulling you towards your money and putting your hope in your money. And again, there is nothing wrong with making plans for your future. We should do that. It's a good idea to save. It's just that when you do that, you need to compensate for the effect that money will have on you. You need to recognize that currency comes with its own current. It pulls you towards it. And we are supposed to be responsible with money. It's a good idea to have life insurance. You want to have some savings. You want to prepare for your retirement. You just need to be able to do that without putting your hope in money. And this is, again, easy when you're poor. Poor people have no problem with this at all because they know firsthand that money runs out. They know firsthand that money will let you down. They know the experience of going to the checkout and using your bank card and having it declined and then having to put items back. Rich people don't necessarily have that experience. But unless you want your hope to run out, you need to find a different source for your hope. Proverbs 18:11 says, the rich think of their wealth as a strong defense. They imagine it to be a high wall of safety. Rich people, which includes us, remember, they can reach a point where they see their money as the source of their safety and their security. If you need food, you go buy food. If you need shelter, you pay for your shelter. If you need transportation, you pay for it. Healthcare, that's not as big of an issue for us in Canada, but there's times when you might need extra and you just go buy it. Whatever it is, whatever you need, you just buy it because you're rich. Our hope migrates to our wallet. And maybe what's worse is that if we allow our hope to migrate towards riches, we'll start to hoard. We'll start to feel like we never quite have enough. And I can't let that go because what if, the more I trust in my riches, the more I need to hold on to the riches because they're my security blanket. Last week we talked about the fact that rich people give away a smaller percentage of their wealth than poor people do. The more and more and more you earn, the less and less and less you give percentage-wise. And so you can see the greater hold it has on you, and the more you feel like you need to hold on to it. And so you can see your hope is migrating towards what's in your wallet. That's an example of how not to be rich, holding on to it and not giving things away, not being generous. Proverbs 18, this passage says, the rich imagine a wall. They imagine it a wall too high to scale, which tells us that it's not actually what they're thinking it is. There's no amount of money that can actually protect us from everything. No matter how rich you are, and in fact, sometimes being more rich might make you more of a target. But think about this in contrast to the verse that comes before it. Proverbs 18, verse 10 says, the name of the Lord is a strong fortress. The godly run to him and are safe. So on the one hand, Proverbs 18:10, he's telling us, God is a strong tower. You can actually run to him and be safe. But the flip side is that when you have money, you imagine that it's enough. So on the one hand, you've got something that's actually worthwhile, but on the other hand, you've got something that you think is good enough, and it never is. It will never be enough. Once again, there's no amount of money that can guarantee you hope in any and all circumstances. So it is dangerous to put your hope in money. Once again, 1 Timothy 6:17. Don't put your trust in money, which is so unreliable. Don't put your hope in wealth, which is so uncertain. Again, you don't, just like arrogance, you don't see this happening, you don't plan for it, you don't want it to happen, it just happens. It's like being in a river with a current. Have you ever been at the beach, swimming, and you swim out from shore, but the waves kind of slowly bring you in, and at some point you look and you realize that you are, 100 meters away from where you started, and if you have to walk back into the beach and then walk to your stuff. The same kind of thing happens it's just a slow movement. Each wave, maybe you make another, you got a raise, you got a promotion, and it came with a little bit more money, and eventually you don't even realize it, but your hope has migrated to your wealth. Teach those who are rich in this world not to be proud, not to trust in their money, which is so unreliable. Their trust should be in God, who richly gives us all we need for our enjoyment. So don't be arrogant. Don't put your trust in money, but do put your trust in God. The chief competitor for your heart is money. A lot of people would put this idea that Jesus and Satan are in this battle for your soul. Satan's already been defeated. It's really this battle that goes on in our mind and our brain, and money is actually one of the biggest competitors, probably the biggest competitor with God. Wealth becomes a substitute for God. Jesus said you can't serve both God and money. So the way to offset the side effects of wealth is to put your hope in God. When you put your hope in God, you won't be arrogant, you'll be humble, you'll be thankful, you'll be generous. Your hope remains steady in every circumstance. The question becomes, how do you put your hope in God? How do you put your trust in God? What are the steps? So as Paul was writing to Timothy, telling him, tell the rich not to do this, he then follows it up with what they should do. Tell them instead to use their money to do good. They should be rich in good works and generous to those in need, always being ready to share with others. You can't be arrogant if you spend all your time thinking up things to do that are good. Like if you just spend all your time thinking, how can I serve others? How can I help others? How can I use what God has given me to make other people's lives better? How can I do good works? You don't have time to be arrogant. You don't think of yourself, you're thinking of others. You can't be rich in good deeds and generous and willing to share if you put your hope in the things that you're generously sharing. So if you want the antidote for this drift that happens, this idea that you are slowly becoming more and more bound to the money and putting your faith and your hope in money, and you do good deeds and you give things away, it's like you are starving this appetite. You're just taking the things that you would put your hope in. If you can give that away, then you're not putting your hope in it. So Andy came up with a statement that eventually I'm going to have you repeat after me. It says, I will not trust in riches, but in him who richly provides. I will not trust in riches, but in him who richly provides. Wealth, as we've been talking about, has side effects. And side effects that come with wealth are the very things that keep us from being good at being rich. So in this entire series is how to be rich. And the side effects are the things that keep us from doing that. But if you address the temptation to trust in riches and reinforce the idea of trusting in God instead, you will neutralize the side effects. Back to 1 Timothy 6:17, the second half of it says, their trust should be in God, who richly gives us all we need for our enjoyment. So again, you can get a new phone if you need to get a new phone. You can get a new car if you get a new car. Sometimes it makes a lot of sense to do what I was saying before, to trade it in, to drive off a lot with something else. Sometimes that makes good financial sense. You can get a new kitchen. You can get new floors. But don't make the mistake of putting your hope in wealth. I mean, God has given us these things for our enjoyment, but we can't let our hope migrate towards the wealth. Why put your hope in the provision when you can put your hope in the one who gives it to you? When you can put your hope in the provider? So here's the awkward part. I want you to repeat after me. Okay? I will not place my hope in riches, but in him who richly provides. I will not place my hope in riches, but in him who richly provides. Okay, and now I'm going to do something that Andy did in his video as well. I'm going to have you put you know how sometimes the tone you have matters? Like, especially in your relationship with your husband or wife or boyfriend and girlfriend. It's just the way that someone says something. So when it comes to the word riches, I want you to put just a little bit of attitude on it, okay? Like, riches. Okay? Try that. Say, riches? Like, unbelievable. I will not place my hope in riches, but in him who richly provides. Because why would you put your hope in riches? I mean, why would you do that? Why would you put your hope in something so uncertain? Why would you put your hope in something so temporary? You know, the stock market could fall apart. You might get sick, and the riches won't help you anyway. Something could happen with your child, and all the money won't turn their heart back towards you. It won't fix your marriage. Why would you put your hope in riches when the things that riches can help is a really small category when you think about what's really most important to you, and you know it's not going to matter in the end? So why put your hope in riches when you can put your hope in him who richly provides? So don't be arrogant. Don't put your hope in wealth. Put your hope in God who richly provides. And next week we're going to come back and we're going to talk about part 3 of how to be rich. I'm going to ask Dick to come up and lead us in a time of prayer.